and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Anthony Williams. Anthony is the head of keyboard and head of instrumental music at Radley College, and he's also a very, very busy concert pianist, performer, festival adjudicator, also I think chairman of one of the festivals, right? Chipping Norton Music
Yeah,
Festival.
very proudly, yes.
Yes, I noticed on your biography say that. And of course, Anthony is also an examiner, moderator and a trainer at the ABRSM. So fantastic to have you here, Anthony. Thank you very much for your time.
A real pleasure.
You're very busy, I know. So thank you, a real pleasure. So let's start. We have so many topics to cover, so many exciting things. But I think many, of course, will be interested, first of all, in how has your department, and since you oversee so much at Radley, how did you cope with what have happened?
Well, I think the first thing that we did was we used it as an opportunity, really, to sort of have a look at everything that we were doing. And providing you have your students right at the forefront, you say, well, what can we do for our students? How can we best provide the sort of continuity, the care and attention to detail, the really inspiring learning experiences for them? How can we best do that? And how can we best use technology? I'm quite lucky that I'm quite interested in technology, always have been. And I've got a lot of colleagues here who are also very interested and, of course, who will support. So it was really a matter of coming up with the ideas and saying, you know, which platform is best for us to be using? Do we use multiple platforms? How do we make it easier for our teachers and as easy as possible for our teachers to do the teaching that they need to do, but also to make sure that there's plenty of context for the learning that's taking place. So if you're teaching a pianist to play, are you doing that in isolation and just going from one week to the next, or do they have lots of goals and targets and opportunities and experiences that they can get involved in? And so we started off and saying, well, what do we do currently? And we're one of the, we're very keen, particularly pianistically here, very keen on getting lots of multiple piano works together. So we have a piano extravaganza every year where we have 7 grand pianos and 21 playing, we do arrangements for 21 at 7 pianos. And so can we involve some of that? All are on piano-based chamber music. In fact, all our chamber music in general, can we get that going? How do we provide concert opportunities for them? How do we give them opportunities to be creative and explore avenues that they've never had a chance, because they're going to have a little bit more time. So,
sure.
And many of them are also very keen on their own technology, so they can and be very adaptable and perhaps explore some of these platforms for putting their own videos together. So as a sort of collection of things, it was a wonderful chance to inspire them and get them to learn various bits of music and to collaborate together, even though it's online. One of the biggest challenges probably was trying to help our instrumental teachers and piano teachers to actually opt into it, because of course many of them weren't really used to the sort of online technology. So we spent most of the Easter holidays in sort of radio silence almost, just saying, look, it's all going to come to you when it's all sorted, when it's all simple, and we'll do it all in one go. Yeah. So just don't worry about it. Have a really cool time over Easter, and then we'll get in touch with you, which we did. And for many of them, it was their first ever Zoom session. And we got them together and we showed them how it all worked. We made sure that everything was there, and that if they wanted particular guidance and help, that was all available, and how to get it. And we hit the ground running pretty much. Obviously the first week in terms of online lessons was a new world, brave new world for all of us. But then,
sorry, but that to interrupt, that was on which platform exactly? So,
well, we use Zoom and Teams, and we, rather than be prescriptive, we opted for Zoom as being perhaps the preferred vehicle for it, because a lot of the boys were here at Radley were like to Zoom a lot, but then all the academic lessons are happening on Teams, which and of course that's part of the Skype package.
Sure.
So we just basically said, do what works best for you. You know, if you suddenly find that Zoom doesn't work, use Skype. If Skype doesn't work, you can use FaceTime. There were various sort of safeguarding issues and things which we needed to make sure that we covered. We made sure we got the best possible advice on those. But it seems to have worked really, really well. And I think within sort of 2 or 3 weeks, we were getting so much positive feedback from all of the teachers and from all of the pupils who were really enjoying it.
Yeah.
So we had virtual concert. We set up a virtual concert hall, and we normally have about 3 or 4 concerts a week at Radley. And we didn't want to stop a lot of those. So our regular 15 at 1:15 concerts on a Wednesday, for instance, we kept going. We have a lot of choral music or chapel music that goes on, that carried on. We carried on with virtual orchestra, we carried on with virtual ensembles, getting them all in one place, making sure that the repertoire was very clear what repertoire they were working to, what concerts people were working towards. And meanwhile, people could sort of dip in as well. So if there were boys who were working at a piece and they suddenly realised they'd got something ready, and there was always an opportunity for them to put that into a sort of a concert. Some of which are live streamed, so they all happen at a particular time. So the 15 at 1:15 always happen at 1:15 on a Wednesday, and they're live streamed. Others are there for parents or the boys to dip into and listen to should they wish.
Amazing, amazing. But I must say that I watched this. I watched those recordings, and I must say they've done amazingly well. And so previously you mentioned that the boys are involved in also editing the video, right?
Yeah, so quite a lot of boys have edited their own videos. So we've got one of our lower sixth formers who's putting together his own charity concert. And about 50%, maybe a bit more of that, is just him, and he plays multiple instruments, and he's put together loads of different videos and of him playing everything, and then he's managed to get some other boys involved in other different items, and even some of the teachers involved in it. And of course, he's got lots of expertise to draw upon. As you know, within the teaching staff, there are lots of people he can ask for help from, and of course, some of the other boys have got expertise in certain areas and certain platforms, so they're all collaborating and working together to make some of these events the success that they definitely are. I mean, we've had some stunning concerts.
Absolutely. No, I can highly recommend. It was really an eye-opener, and also so beautifully done with also images from the school and the garden and the chapel. I really enjoyed it. It was really, really tasteful.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you actually, has there been anything that you will use in the future? And I mean, in the hope that this will end at some point.
Yeah. Well, I think there's been a whole philosophical discussion actually about how much time our pupils actually have, because I know that there's a lot of teachers out there. It doesn't matter whether you teach at a school or privately. There's a lot of thought. Well, you know, you're having a piano lesson one day, you're doing a gym class the next day. You know, you're going out and doing something else the day after that, and everybody is frantically busy. And of course, that's brilliant. It's lovely that everybody's busy, but what it does mean is that there's not enough headspace sometimes to really do something well and to sort of pursue it on a regular basis. And one of the things we've found here, and we're as guilty as anyone else is, of trying to keep people busy. You know, the more things we can offer, the more that the students do, the better it is. And I suppose I've subscribed to that a little bit. What we've found is that giving a little bit more time, given a little bit more space, because, you know, there aren't all the sporting activities that they would normally be involved in, there aren't some of the other things, they're suddenly beginning to think, right, well, what can we fill this space with? And they're doing things that they have a passion for. And some of our musicians, the boy, for instance, I was talking about earlier on, who's putting on his own charity concert, is a young man who's very gifted, very talented in a number of areas, but has often turned up for lessons, and I teach him the piano and said, well, haven't had much time to do any practice this week. I've done a bit of this and I've done a bit of that, and I've picked out this that I quite like, and it's great and it's been really nice, but there's never been a sort of an end to it, as it were, a result from it. And then all of a sudden he's got this space, and he's put together his own studio, and he's recorded this, and he's put that together, and I've now got 4 performances that I want to play you, and what do you think about this, and do you think the balance is right, and what do you think about the piano playing there, and suddenly you think, whoa, this is a different person. And it's because suddenly he's got that space and time. And I use that as one example, but I've got many, many examples of that's been happening. And a lot of the reports that are coming back from the visiting teachers is exactly the same, that these boys have got time to think about their performances. They've got time, they're recording their performances. And you're saying, well, actually, could you send me an audio recording? So I can have a really good quality recording that I can then make some comments and some suggestions about. And they'll do that, but they won't send you the first audio recording, because what they do is they record it and they listen to it and they think,
yes, of course,
oh, is that what I really sound like? And so they record it again, and then they record it again, and then eventually the recording you get, you think, whoa, what have you managed to do over the last 2 weeks? You know, and then you're able to give them feedback which is probably on a significantly higher and more sophisticated level than they've been receiving in the past. And of course, with all of our concerts and virtual concert halls are videoed. So you're then saying, well, actually, it's fantastic. Now, look, I'm hearing some brilliant things on this audio. Now, work at these elements, maybe do one more audio recording for us to have a check through, and then it's your time to video it and put yourself on stage, as it were, and that video becomes the on-stage performance, which I have to say in many instances are significantly more polished, more musical, more accomplished than some of the performances we get when they're actually here, when they're simply
Sure.
sort of,
And also,
dashing
of
in.
course, they can show, to their friends and families and
Exactly.
relatives, and so you kind of you almost are responsible to produce a better result because it's on the video and everyone can see it, right?
Yes, and of course they're in that. I mean, that is so true because of course they then have responsibility for their own performances in a
Sure.
way that they sort of don't when they're here. It's almost like, right, we've got this concert, and yes, we'll do it, but we're doing it for Radley. Whereas
Hmm.
actually now they're not doing it for Radley; they're doing it for themselves. They're taking real pride in what's
Yeah.
out there, knowing that, as you say, all their relatives and are going to see it, that it's going to be there for posterity, that their grandchildren maybe will see it. They want it to be
Yes,
really good. So,
indeed, indeed. What a
and I
nice
think.
archive.
Yes, and ownership of your own performances and of your own progress and of your own learning is such a crucial thing. But
True.
sometimes because we're in a culture of exams and we're in a culture of you have to get this and you have to do that and these are the hoops you have to jump through, that almost becomes more important than developing the individual. And obviously
True.
schools like this and as do many other schools, they want to develop the all-round individual, but your hands are tied because there is a time scale
Hmm.
that you have to go through, and there are these hoops you have to jump through, and sometimes that doesn't give you the breathing space to develop
Totally.
personalities and to develop your skills and your passions in the way that you might want to. I think it's been a really amazing experience, actually, and there is a lot we'll take with us. I'm not going to stop, for instance, encouraging them to record and send me recordings of their progress during the week,
Hmm.
even though we're on a campus here. They're only
Yeah.
going to be 200 meters down there, but I'm going to ask them to still send me recordings so that I can then feed back things that they might think about developing. So in order to sort of help them with their progress through the week, rather than sort of simply having one massive session every week, try and keep drip
Yeah.
feeding.
Yeah. That was extraordinary. But I wanted to ask you, since you have a very busy department, and also really quite an exception here in this series because you also oversee the instrumental music. It's really a lot, of course, on the top of everything else you do. So, what has been the biggest challenge, let's say, in motivating your teachers and supporting your teachers?
Well, this is going to sound awful, but actually, I don't think there has been a challenge. I think we've got just over 40 teachers, and I would
Hmm.
have to say that they have jumped into this. They've put their whole selves into it. Literally, they have
Hmm.
been really enthusiastic from the word go. I think one of the biggest challenges was supporting those for whom technology was a little bit
Hmm.
scary, and where it was perhaps some of them were dealing with computers or iPads that were so many years old they were struggling to cope with
Yeah,
with the streaming and all the rest of it. So I spent a lot of time with them, talking them through it, sharing screens with them, showing them how to download the various different software and things. But actually, most of the problems were technological. Most of the lessons
hmm,
seemed to have going really, really well. And even from those who were most nervous and anxious about it, that they came back and said, well, I just had the most amazing lesson. They find it quite tiring, and I
yeah.
think we all do. I think spending an hour and a half of lessons is enough, I think, whereas you probably face to face you could have more, but an hour
Mm.
and a half of lessons online is more than enough before you need a break.
Sure, sure.
Mostly because anything like me, you spend all your time literally shouting at the screen. You got to talk really loudly to get it over to Hong Kong or
Yes,
to Reading or wherever it is.
exactly. Yes, I find the same with my students. I do shout, and the energy is, I feel really I've just done an enormous recital after just one lesson.
Yeah, it's exactly
Um,
right.
uh,
But I will honestly say that I don't think it has been a challenge in terms of motivating the teachers. I think they've opted into it, and we've made sure that there have been, as I say, things for their pupils to work towards. That's always the
mhm,
thing, isn't it? Making sure that there are targets for those who
sure.
want them, making sure that the work that they do is recognised, and making sure that there is an inspirational person at the other end to say, "Yeah, really well done. Let's see what we can do to move it a bit further."
Important, of course, which leads me to another question. And let's talk, as of course your role as at the ABRSM, and let's talk about the value of these musical exams and assessments in one's curriculum. So tell us about it a little bit. Is it really important, or do people just kind of overuse it to just practice for the sake of having a good mark, an exam, and a grade?
Mm. Well, one of the interesting things you just said was the use of assessments in the curriculum, and that is really significant because that's all assessments are. They are part of a curriculum, a small part of it, and I think their value is wonderful at certain times for certain individuals. It's got to be the right time, and it has to be for the right reasons. And assessments are a little bit like going to a doctor's in a sense. You know, you go to the doctor's and you say, well, can you give a checkup, just make sure that everything's all right? And they test you, test your blood pressure, and they'll test your reflexes or whatever it is. And they'll say, no, you're perfectly healthy, carry on. And that's sort of how we need to think about assessments. They're not something that, you wouldn't spend 5 or 6 weeks working on yourself as much as possible before you go to the doctors to make sure that everything's all right, and then say, right, okay, now I've got to start working towards my next doctor's assessment. No, you don't do that. It's just a sort of snapshot, really. And I think if we see assessments like that, it's really important. They can provide amazingly valuable feedback. They can say to us, for instance, that actually, yeah, you're playing really musically, you've got fantastic oral skills, but actually your reading skills are not quite as fluent as they might be, and you will be, you'll enjoy your music making much more, and you'll probably be a better musician if your notation skills are better. Or it might be that you're saying, yeah, you're playing really well, but actually maybe your playing could be better if you could hear a bit more of the textual detail, or if you're more aware of the harmonies and more aware of the cadence points were. And actually that's reflected in oral. We can see here that actually if you work a little bit more at that,
Sure.
that's going to enhance you as a musician. And I think all those things are absolutely brilliant. And often it doesn't tell the teacher anything they don't already know.
Yeah.
But what it does is give them the opportunity to say, well, I told you so. And of course it does motivate. It does motivate some students. They quite like to know that they're at a certain level. But the one thing it is absolutely not is a curriculum. And I've had lots of discussions with the teachers in the past. For instance, scales, there is various selections of scales that you have for each of the individual grades. And if ABRSM were, as they are in fact, to change some of the scales that are actually going to be presented, one of the comments is, well, I would always teach this scale at this, this grade. I think we should definitely have B flat major or whatever it is. And you think, well, there's nothing to stop you teaching B flat major.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, there's nothing to stop you teaching C sharp melodic minor when they're at grade 1 level, if you really want to.
Sure.
It's up to you. It's entirely up to you what you want to teach, and what you teach shouldn't be geared around the assessment. The assessment is a snapshot. It says, actually, I think these are probably the most important things to assess. In the time available, we can assess a few of them, and it gives you a little indicator of how healthy you are as a musician. That's the key thing. Other than that, no. I mean, get on, learn some other wonderful repertoire.
Yes.
Keep going with all of these supporting studies. Work out how they all fit in. One of the dangers of an assessment is that they separate out the elements.
Sure.
So they're separating out scales and they're separating out citing, not because that's how we should teach, but because that's how we can have to assess it.
Yes.
And of course, we have to put it all back into the pot after that. And it's the teacher's role to say, actually, every lesson, I can see that this activity that I'm doing here develops some of the sight reading skills and develops these oral skills. And there's scales in here. Well, I'm developing the knowledge and understanding the geography of scales. This is all happening within the pieces. Now, okay, well, we're thinking about doing this grade exam. Let's just isolate those elements out and show you how they're going to be assessed. But you're doing them anyway. And I think there is a danger, very much a danger, that the tail wags the dog and that the assessments wag the curriculum, as it were. And it should be the curriculum using assessment, much in the same way as a curriculum should involve concerts, going to concerts, performing in concerts maybe, doing festivals, doing masterclasses at all sorts of levels, getting involved in composition work, doing some improvising, really just being the sort of all-round musician.
Sure,
and,
sure.
And that's your curriculum.
Yes,
and the occasional assessment is a good thing, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
No, totally. But it's very interesting because, of course, now ABRSM is moving towards performance-oriented exams. That's a hot topic.
It is. I gather, I was hearing from somebody who works a lot in Australia that they have a very similar sort of exam over there, which is really popular. And I'm sure that these exams will be really popular. And they will have their place, I think, is the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
If you if you are going to perform in front of one of the ABRSM examiners for pieces which you've studied and you're performing to the highest level, it's wonderful to have feedback on those. You know, it's both that reassures you that your performances are fluent and musical and confident and convincing,
Sure.
and there is some satisfaction in that, and also there may be some very really valuable feedback that says actually if you really want to make your performance convincing, these are things you can work at. Because exams are not a curriculum, you're not saying, well, actually, just because you're doing a
Yeah.
performance-only exam, you shouldn't be working at these other things. And I think we shouldn't devalue the experience and the professionalism of teachers in saying, well,
Mm.
actually, you know, the reason that they're talking about balance here is because is because you're not really listening to it, you're not really aware of top notes and bottom notes. Well, did you know that actually, you know, if you're doing a grade 6, 7, or 8 oral test, you know, you're having to listen to top lines and
Sure.
bottom lines and repeat them and things. That's why those are there, to make sure those are developing. Even though you're just doing a performance exam, we still need to develop those things. So you're
Sure.
not sort of saying to teachers, these things are not important. And I don't think for one moment teachers will think they're not important.
Mm-hmm.
But equally well, I think the one thing a performance assessment does not do is separate out those elements
Yeah.
and give you that sort of checklist. So it's a different sort of exam entirely. It's not
Mm-hmm.
that it's not going to tell you you're healthy necessarily, but it may well tell you that you're performing extremely well and give you
Yes.
hints that there are
Yeah.
areas for improvement. And your teacher then will say, well, the reason you've got these areas for improvement is because you're not quite healthy in this area. You know, you do need to be
Sure.
able to read the
Yes.
score a bit better and read notation a bit better, so that in your practice you're more aware of what's going on the score, or that you know you're not listening to articulation in quite the right way. You need to explore that a bit more. So these things are valid points, and then it's for the teacher to outline those different elements. Like it is a different sort of exam, and I think as long as both the teacher and the pupil and the parents are aware of the difference between the two,
Yeah.
I think then it should work very well. Yeah.
No, very interesting, and I completely agree with you. You know, it's something different. It doesn't mean you suddenly now stop all the technical work.
No, no.
Exactly. But I also, of course, again, on top of everything else, you are very busy at EPTA, yes, so European Piano Teachers Association. So what is your role there, and what is this organization about?
So, well, it's interesting because I'm actually only a fairly new member of EPTA, but I seem to have and very proudly have become a member of the management committee there,
Mm-hmm.
with Murray McLaughlin chairing it. And I think what EPTA is all what we're hoping EPTA is all about is about supporting piano teachers European wide, and EPTA UK, which is what I'm particularly involved in, is obviously a support organisation for teachers. I think the overriding philosophy behind EPTA, I think, is something that we're beginning to discuss a little bit more, and we're beginning to explore, because I think the lockdown has very much meant that a lot of teachers who are members of EPTA have been approaching us and saying, well, look, hang on a second, how can you support us in this?
Mm-hmm.
And as an organisation, we're saying, well, actually, are we really supporting you as much as we should?
Mm-hmm.
And are we supporting the breadth of teachers that we should? And I think for many of us now, we're thinking it should be supporting everyone, from those who are coming into teaching as student teachers to those who are perhaps the most experienced teachers and
Sure.
performers in the country. And it should be embracing all those, and people at the top end supporting those at the bottom end,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone really getting involved as a piano teaching support community.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
and I'm sort of talking about the sort of EPTA that I suppose I would like to see. And I'm only one of a few, you know, but we're working together. And I think
Sure.
I've only, as I say, been a really very active member of EPTA for just over a year. But I
Sure.
think there's definitely a feeling that we want to move in that sort of direction. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm rather hoping that in 2-3 years time, that's what you will see EPTA as, and that there will be very few piano teachers out there who won't want to become a member of EPTA, because it will just be the most amazing support community, with lots of resources, lots of ideas, lots of enthusiasm, lots of events happening. I think it could be very, very exciting.
And
And
you of course, have a history of supporting, I think, piano teachers, because you've written this amazing book, right? The Survival Guide. And I just wanted to know whether there is a survival guide to the sequel, or Survival Guide Online.
well, there isn't yet, and that's partly time. I mean, I've been very, very fortunate in my career in doing a lot of presentations to teachers. I'm passionate about teaching in every guise, and learning about teaching and discussing teaching with teachers, and standing up there and giving my latest views and having them shouted down, and then finding out a little bit more about it. It's brilliant, and. So somebody will say to me, well, look, could you come and talk about pedaling, for instance, or could you come and talk about this choice of repertoire? Could you come and talk about this particular, elements of technique or strategies for teaching? And so I've had the luxury then of almost being paid, as it were, to sit down and think about it and to research and to discuss and start putting it together. And then suddenly realizing that I started off thinking I knew everything there was to know about it. And I finish off before I've actually gone into there thinking I'm a bit of a cheat, a charlatan. You're going there actually thinking there is so much I don't know, and yet putting these things down and gradually moving on. And suddenly I had this amazing pool of ideas and pools of thoughts and some resources about different elements of teaching.
Sure.
And they're all in different folders and different sheets of paper and everywhere. And I thought, well, how nice would it be to bring quite a lot of those together and fill in all the gaps and just provide something that was a broad resource for piano teachers, which I'm not into sort of the Williams teaching strategy or technique or anything like that. The only thing that is Williams about it, I would say, is the overall philosophy, which is that music is at our hearts. So musical communication should be at the heart of every single thing we do. And from the moment a child is 5 or 6 and starts to learn the piano, or even earlier, that every note they play comes from a desire to communicate.
Sure.
And it seems to me that's for me, that's always been inspiration. I was very lucky to have many years with a wonderful, wonderful piano professor called Alexander Kelly, who for a while was head of keyboard at the Royal Academy of Music. He was also a poet, it has to be said. And the reason I say that is because I actually prefaced the book with his poem, which is called Music Teacher. And it goes through basically talking about all of the different elements of notation that are in a score, but basically saying, they don't just mean, staccato is not just short. A staccato can be anything from a sort of, this is not literal from his poem, but it can be anything from a raindrop to a hailstone. And
Sure.
and the final line sums it all up, where he says, "The final pause lunga, inevitable death." It's not just a pause. It's much more than that. And I think the more we can engage young children, particularly with the emotional side of music, with the fact that to every sound, to every articulation, to every melody, there is something going on that's personal to them that they can embrace, then the more they'll be committed to that music, and the more they may not become a great pianist, and how few will become great pianists, but hopefully they will be the musicians who will want to come and be the audience to hear the next great pianist.
Sure.
Because music means that much to them. And that's the overriding philosophy of the book. And then everything else is broad principles. So I try to steer clear of fancy Williams techniques or any other techniques, really, in the sense of, but basically say, here are the broad principles. It's really important from a physiological point of view that everything is balanced, that there's the minimum amount of effort being used, and those are the broad principles. These are ways that you can discover how that's happening, and you can look at the wrist, and you can look at the arms, and you can, it's very obvious that if your elbow is out from your body, that there is tension in the shoulder. Now, maybe that's what you want, but on the whole, you don't. So have a think about these things. But beyond that, it's about getting the right sound at the right time. And if you have to use your nose to do it, then use your nose to do it, get the right sound, but there's all sorts of subtleties beyond that. We can look at every great pianist and see that all their techniques are different. There is no one good technique. You can't say you can't play the piano because you haven't got a rounded hand. Well, you look at 90% of the pianists and you'll find that they're playing with flat hands, quite a lot of them. You can't play the piano because you've got too low a wrist. Well, no, look at Glenn Gould, or you've got too high a wrist. Well, no, you can look at some of these other pianists. Nothing's out of the equation, as long as it creates the right, you can get the right sound, you can get the right effects, you can do what you want. And that's sort of where it comes from, really. But here are the basics, the incontrovertible truths, as far as I'm aware. And then beyond that, explore, experiment, and treat every single pupil as an individual, both emotionally in terms of their character and physically as well. You know,
I think it's a very, very, very nice approach, and also, it's something that is kind of for the love of music rather than do this and this and that, and it's so prescriptive, which I think quite a few people do, and using images and using imagination, it's so
yeah.
important. Yeah,
Yeah, it's crucial, and I think you say so often here. I mean, when I'm adjudicating, even I will hear, a parent or a teacher, I don't quite know which, saying to their young child as they go up to play, now, just go up there and enjoy it, and you think, well, why have they not been enjoying it up till now? You can't just switch on your musical mind, So if if you're practicing and you're worrying about right notes and wrong notes, and you're worrying about right rhythms and right and wrong fingerings, if that's been the whole focus of your practice, and then how can you suddenly switch that into a musically communicative performance when you
totally.
actually come and sit down and play? And so one of the things I say in the book, and I say to a lot of teachers, have a think about your lesson at the end of it all, and work out how much of your time was spent thinking about right notes and wrong notes, and right rhythms and wrong rhythms, and all those sorts of things, and what are the first things you're saying to that people at the
Yeah,
end? What messages are you giving?
yeah,
If the first thing when they're finished, it doesn't matter how the performance goes, is, do you know what? I absolutely loved the sound you made on that first note. If that's
yeah,
all you can say,
of course,
that sound on that first note had this sort of sense, then you're giving the message that actually sound and communication are the most important things. That's why you're doing all
totally.
this technical work. That and I think having that in your mind all the time, that
Mm,
um, yes, right, all the accuracy is really important, but inspiring somebody to achieve that accuracy has to come from something that's within. And it's very
totally.
easy to break that musical umbilical cord between musical communication and simply the pragmatism of playing the piano. You've got to keep that musical umbilical cord going all the time, and that's where the teacher's role comes in. This is what you want musically, this is how you do it, rather than, right, well, let's practice like this, and drill your fingers and all the rest of it, and now, by the way, let's add a bit of musicality on top. No,
Sure.
it's artificial.
Wow, that's really fantastic, and really, such kind of a concept that I think everyone should really take on board, and look at the music as a source of enjoyment. And also from talking to, people who sit on the panel, let's say like Tchaikovsky competition for like the proper in Moscow, like Barry Douglas or Peter Donahoe, and all they say that they want to have a good time and they want to see people enjoying themselves. So it doesn't matter, whether you are in a local festival or at the climax of competitions, the Tchaikovsky, everyone wants just to enjoy, to see enjoyment and to see music making at just different levels, I guess.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely right, and I think somebody who you either may have interviewed or are going to interview, who's head of keyboard at the college, Vanessa Latache. She
Yes.
was she was also we were contemporaries at the academy, and she was also a pupil of the same teacher, and I invited her up to adjudicate our competition here, and there was some good playing from some of the boys that there, and. One of the things that I was most proud of was at the end of it all, she was able to tell me something about the character of each of the individual
Oh, nice.
performers on the basis of their playing. She said, well, I can hear in your playing that there's that in your character and there's that in your personality. And that's what playing should all be about.
Sure,
Not, oh,
sure.
well, yes, you reproduced accurately what was on the score, or that was, or that you obviously got a really strong sense of the style and idiom of the time, or none of that. But actually, I really heard something about who you are in that
Yeah,
playing.
yeah,
For me, and I know for her too, that's really important.
yes, of course, the individuality. But which leads me to actually another topic, and talking about your festival. So Cheap and Norton Music Festival, the first or the only, if I'm correct, non-competitive festival. So tell us a bit more about this.
Well, yeah, I was. I can't even remember how many years ago it was. Do a lot of festival adjudicating, and Chipping Norton is probably about 45 minutes away from me, so it's
Sure.
relatively close. And I went there, had a wonderful, wonderful time, and came back, and then got a phone call not that long afterwards saying, "Well, would you mind being our president?" And I thought you had to be 150, to be a president of anything. I had no idea what this was, but. I very proudly, as I said before, became president of Chipping Norton, and a great supporter of it. There's an amazing group of teachers in that area who I think, share, you know, the same sort of musical philosophy, particularly with their young pupils, and that's why it's non-competitive, because it's about the playing, it's about the fact that they're getting up there and actually giving of themselves and prepared to have a go.
Sure.
And without the sort of judgment of whether you're first or you're second or you're third, just having the feedback. And that's what I love about festivals, is the live feedback element. So when I'm
Sure.
adjudicating, you're able to sit down and say, look, I love the way you did this, and that was brilliant. If the tempo was slightly different, this is how it could sound, or just bear in mind what the title is and how you're going to convey that dance a little bit more, and you can demonstrate little bits and really engage with them in a way that you can't if you're sitting writing an exam script, for instance.
Yeah, sure.
It's a very different sort of environment, and I'm a great supporter of it. And you know, Chipping Norton Music Festival flourishes, which is absolutely wonderful. It has a large number of concerts associated with it as well, which is fantastic for sort of inspiring the younger generation. But a lot of the festivals are doing really good work. There are also other festivals which I think are sadly finding it quite hard at the moment, so mostly because there's not quite the support from local teachers, or they're not able to give the time to support the festivals. But I'm on a bit of a mission to try and encourage more and more teachers to get involved with festivals, to encourage their pupils to get involved in festivals. As you know, as we were talking about assessments a little while ago, it's part of the whole curriculum. You know, festivals can be a really, really valuable part of it. And the more we engage with them and use them, the more valuable we'll realize that they are. And
yes, of course. Well, it's really fantastic and so interesting. But I think moving to literally kind of final question. So what is your prognosis in terms of the future of the classical music? Hopefully, when we get out of this virus.
Oh, that's a very profound question. There was a survey done, I think it was done by ABRSM, and one of the really interesting things that came out of it was a questionnaire about from the pupils about their teachers, and they're saying, well, does your teacher think you do enough practice? And they said, well, no, they don't. Do you do enough practice? Well, probably not on the things I'm meant to be doing. And so you have this sort of series of negatives, and they say, so how long do you spend doing music during the week? And of course, they said, well, quite a lot of time, actually. I spend loads of my time doing music. And the thing is, what they're doing is exploring music, but not the music they're being asked to do by their piano teacher or by their violin teacher. And we find exactly the same thing here. And I think at a lot of schools, I'm hearing the same thing, where you'll find that there are students who are either not involved in music in any way, in terms of from the face of it, you know, they're not having instrumental lessons, they're not appearing in concerts, they're not even telling their mates that they're involved in music. And then you suddenly find that they have a SoundCloud account where they have loads and loads of compositions that they've been doing, and really profound, sophisticated stuff, which requires a lot of listening and a lot of thought and a lot of structuring. And you realize that actually music is alive and well. Now, within your question was the word classical. And I think perhaps we need to think about music in a very different way.
Right.
I know there are people who are very worried about who's going to play Mozart in the future, but to be honest with you, there are lots of different avenues into Mozart. It doesn't matter whether you're into hip hop, or whether you're into garage, or whether you're into electronic dance music with all sorts of descriptions, or just popular contemporary music in general. If that's your way, then get involved in it, because you'll find that actually there'll be people there saying, yeah, but I use this amazing sample in this particular mix that I've got here. Do you know where that comes from? That comes from Prokofiev's Second Piano Concerto. I love that opening, you know. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'll go and listen to Prokofiev's Second Piano Concerto. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of seeing, we start at year 9. And of course, the boys many years ago would come in and I'd say, well, so what is it that you're listening to? I don't want to show my age too much, but, you know, on your Walkmans, you know, what are you listening to on your Walkmans? And they'd be saying, well, you know, I'm listening to this band or that band and all the rest of it. Now they're coming in with their iPhones and their MP3 players and things, and they're saying, well, I've got a bit of jazz here, I've got a bit of classical music there, I've got a bit of pop there, I've got a bit of indie music here. The sort of music they listen to, there doesn't seem to be any sort of judgment about whether it's classical or whether it's pop or whether it's jazz. It's just music that they enjoy and that they've been introduced to and that they really love. And of course, we're very soundbite culture at the moment, and it's quite difficult to encourage a 13-year-old or 14-year-old who's busy being pushed from pillar to post. Do this, do that, do that. You're off on there doing that bit of sport. You're off on there doing that bit of academic work. You're off to, it's very difficult to encourage them to sit down and listen to a Mahler symphony. It's not going to work, But to get them to listen just to a bit of something, say 5 minutes of something, and say, "What do you think of that?" And they go, oh, "Yeah, I actually quite like that," because it's and then maybe it just provides them with the opportunity to explore a little bit more of
Sure.
that and gradually get into classical music. I think the other thing that's important are arrangements. I know I have a lot of lively discussions with teachers about whether arrangements of classical works for beginner piano or even for advanced piano are relevant and important. Well, of course, ask Rachmaninoff or various other people whether arrangements are important. Well, of course they are. And they've always been there. But of course, from an educational point of view, if you're playing, a theme from a Schubert symphony or a little bit, even if it's a little bit of Peter and the Wolf and things, suddenly these are tunes that you recognise and you
Totally.
think, oh, and you're at university and you may have enjoyed your music at school, and you walk past your university and somebody's doing Peter and the Wolf, and you think, how can I remember playing that when I was doing my grade 2 or whatever it was, and I'd love to hear that tune again. And you go in and you become a member of the audience.
Sure.
I think classical music will thrive if audiences thrive. That's the point. And we need to get out of this mentality that every pupil that we've got, we need to turn into a concert pianist. No, what we do, we want to encourage them to be a really enthusiastic, engaged musician who happens to play the piano. And if they happen to play the piano to a very high level, they will become a concert pianist. Well, that's great. If they don't play it to a very high level, let's make sure that that the piano playing experience that they've had isn't one about simply getting the right notes and getting the right rhythms and getting the right fingering, because that's a maths lesson. And that is not going to encourage them to be the audiences of the future.
Sure.
Let's encourage them to really relate to the music they're playing. Let's encourage them to listen and relish in the beauty of sound, of balance, of articulation, because it has a personality and character, and because it engages with their creativity and imagination. If we do that, then they'll absorb music. That's how they'll see music and envision music. If we're not so dictatorial that we say it has to be classical music, why can't they play a little bit of pop music? It's not going to stop them being a classical musician. Why can't they play a little bit of jazz? Why can't they pick out certain songs that they actually like? Because we can still focus on getting a beautiful sense of line. We can still focus on just the right articulation, on technique. I mean, some of my people will come and say, I really want to play this tune that I've just heard. And you think, okay, well, let's put something together. That's going to be quite tricky to play on the piano. You're going to have some very complex, sophisticated fingering and control to be able to play that. Well, that's great, because they're doing it. And they can then bring that to other works later on. And so then they don't become judgmental about what sort of style they're playing. But music means a lot to them. And then they can take that music as far as they want, and they can take the playing of the instrument as far as they're able. But hopefully they will be the audiences which will enable the money to come in to provide the funds for those who are actually sitting up on the concert platform.
Thank you. Amazing, really, really helpful and really interesting perspective. I think very refreshing also for many. And the last question, Anthony. So what is your advice to young aspiring pianists at this time of strange time of not getting out of the houses, really?
Think of yourself as a musician and enjoy yourself at the piano, and don't feel that when you are sitting at the piano that it has to be towards the work that you were set by your teacher, for instance. Explore beyond it. Sit down, try improvising, try making up something. Think of a song that you just heard on the radio and see if you can work it out. Treat the piano like your friend, and treat the piano like a human being, and enjoy yourself, and don't allow anyone else to say, oh, well, you should be practicing properly, in inverted commas. But actually explore what the instrument can do. Find sounds and colors and use the world of imagination at the instrument. Be a composer. That's really important. It's extraordinary. The conversations we would be having 120 years ago would be very different to now. You wouldn't have a musician who wasn't also composing and transcribing and improvising and doing and getting involved in all sorts of different elements. How we got to the stage where we are so narrow that we only ever play other people's music is quite extraordinary. That's like saying, well, you can't learn to talk. The only way you can learn to talk is to read other people's words. That's what we're saying. And I'm an expert in reading other people's words, but I can't actually string a sentence together at will and have a conversation. all I can do is read other people's words. That's not what music is about, and it's not what talking is about. And that's sort of where we've gone musically. I think that's totally bizarre. So start to unpack that, sit at the instrument, and just understand that you can play anything you like, and it's never wrong if you're playing your own music. And you can compose anything you like, and it's never wrong if it's your own composition. The only time you have a duty of care, as it were, to something else is when you're playing somebody else's music. In the same way that if they played your music, you have a duty of care to try and understand it and try and communicate it in the most personable way. But I think that's the best advice I would give. Think of yourself as a musician, not as a pianist. Musician first.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, Anthony, that was really inspiring. And thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful talk and wonderful answers to my questions. So thank you. And thank you for being my guest. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.